Joining me now to talk about this is the former acting Secretary of Homeland Security under President Trump, Chad Wolf. Chad, thanks very much for being with us. What do you think of this policy? Do you agree with what the governor of Texas is doing, loading these migrants onto buses and just dropping them off in New York and Washington without really much of a plan in terms of dealing with those municipalities? I mean, they're just handing them over.
Well, I think this is what DHS has been doing now for 17 months, right? So as individuals cross that border, they're sending them into communities all over the country, whether it's in New York, it's Chicago, it's Tennessee, it's a number of states. So this hasn't just been happening over the last 4 or 5 weeks. This has been happening for, again, 17 months under this administration. This is the catch and release policy that they are advocating for.
The state of Texas is taking it upon itself to do this.
Absolutely.
In addition to that.
I think what the governor is saying is that he's been under siege, in a sense, for 17 months. You talk about 4 or 5 or maybe even 6,000 migrants that are going to New York City and Washington, D.C. That's what comes across the border in a single day, not only in Texas, but obviously in Arizona and elsewhere. And so I think what he's saying is we need the federal government to step up, and clearly his calls for it, his pleas with the federal government are not working. So you and I are having this conversation. Big city mayors are now weighing in on the immigration crisis that we see at the border. I think part of that is the purpose of let's start talking about solutions to the crisis along that border today.
But how do you have a conversation when you're dumping migrants off in other parts of the country?
But again, you're not dumping anything. Yeah. This is the policy of the Biden administration. We've seen those flights
the governor
time
of Texas
and time again.
The governor of Texas is doing it.
The governor of Texas is doing it. The governor of Arizona is doing it. Again, their facilities along that border, and even in the state of Texas, even not along that border, they are overwhelmed. They're beyond capacity. And so what he is saying is let's move some of these illegal aliens to these sanctuary cities. You got to remember, New York, D.C., these are sanctuary cities. These are policies that these mayors and these jurisdictions have embraced that says not only will you be shielded from law enforcement if you come to our city,
so it's a political
we're actually going to give you benefits.
It's a political move.
I think
it's taking a shot at sanctuary cities.
I'm not sure it's a political move. It's a reality move for Governor Abbott. He is overwhelmed at that border.
You agree with it?
He is overwhelmed at that border, and he's trying to figure out how do we start that national conversation, because he alone is obviously not moving the Biden administration. Yeah. How do we have that national debate about some policies?
Why didn't he do it when you were in charge?
Well, because we didn't have the crisis that we see today. We are in a historic crisis that we have never seen before. If you think back, Jim, and I know you covered it, 2018, 2019, we had a crisis in the Trump administration. It dwarfs the crisis, the minor crisis, the UAC crisis that we see today. And so obviously we were a partner in trying to solve that crisis. You don't have the federal government being a partner today.
Well, you mentioned the Trump administration and what it did when it came to migrants coming across the border. You were involved in the family separation policy that ultimately, under Trump, would take more than 3,000 children away from their families. And it was immortalized by this audio that was captured by ProPublica. Let's watch.
No llores. Vas a llegar con... Mira, ella te va a explicar y te va a ayudar.
Con mi tía, por lo menos, para que después llegue. ¿Me puedes abrir alguien me cerró la puerta esa? Que me venga a traer mi tía para llevar.
I mean, should you really be in a position of critiquing what's going on in this administration when your administration was literally ripping children away from their parents?
Well, absolutely. So, look, I think it's important.
Absolutely what?
Absolutely. It's important to keep in mind. Absolutely. I have a view on what should be occurring now. You talk about 3,000 migrants or children back in 2018 in a 4-week period. Let's talk about a 17-month period where we have a UAC crisis that we have never experienced before, UAC being minors. We have thousands and thousands and thousands.
Those are the unaccompanied children.
Those are the unaccompanied children.
I'm asking about the children that came across, and forgive me for interjecting. I don't want to be accused of being rude, but you know, these children who are coming into the country with their parents through no fault of their own, they were ripped away from their parents during your administration. You were a part of crafting that policy. Do you ever think about these kids?
I think about all the children and all the families and all the individuals that come
those
to
specific
that.
kids,
I think about all of them. Let me answer. I think about all of them that come to that border illegally, try to cross that border illegally, putting their lives in the hands of smugglers, the trauma that they have to endure through that process. But what I would also focus on is over the past 17 months, thousands and thousands of children have been separated from their parents because of Biden administration policies. When you exempt minors from Title 42, but yet you apply it to their adults or to their family members, you see, and we've seen this, we have reporting on this, that
guys put Title 42 in place.
Thousands and thousands of families are separating themselves before they get to that border. So let's start talking about the thousands of children that have been separated from their parents under this administration that any number dwarfs what occurred in 2018
Chad,
or 2019.
Let me ask you, you were a part of putting that policy in place of separating children from their parents. Do you regret being part of that?
Look, I totally agree with President Trump when he ended that policy. What I said at the time, or what I've said several times, is once you lose the trust of the American people, when you are instituting those types of policies, particularly law enforcement officers instituting them, it's time for a change. So absolutely, I agree with that. And I agree with President Trump when he decided to end that.
Should that policy ever come back?
Look, what they do on that border and how they separate, because I think it's important to remember, DHS and Border Patrol officers right now, to this day, are separating families for a variety of different reasons along that border.
But a simple yes or no. Should that policy ever come back? Separating children from their parents? Again, if you can answer yes or no, that would be great.
Again, law enforcement does that every single day. They do it under the Biden administration. They've done it under multiple administrations. I agree. I will answer the question again. I agree when President Trump decided to end that specific, when we talk about zero tolerance,
and
I agreed with him
back.
At that time.
Zero tolerance.
I don't see any reason why it would need to come back. But it's time to start talking about how we enforce border security along that border and solve the crisis that's today, instead of burying your head in the sand and hope it goes away on its own. It's not going to go away on its own.
And I want to turn to the recent FBI search at Mar-a-Lago. Here's what some Republicans have been saying about the FBI since that search.
The FBI raid of President Trump is a complete abuse and overreach of its authority.
Do I know that the boxes of material they took from Mar-a-Lago, that they won't put things in those boxes to entrap him?
I will make sure these tyrants pay the price.
The way our federal government has gone, it's like what we thought about the Gestapo and people like that they just go after people.
Is that kind of rhetoric going to get somebody hurt, do you think? Are you worried about that? I mean, you were in charge of the Department of Homeland Security. You've seen the threat of domestic extremists. That's been brought to your desk, I'm sure, on a number of occasions. That kind of rhetoric, healthy, helpful?
Well, I don't think it's going to get anyone hurt. I certainly hope that it doesn't. I think some of the comments that you just played, I think there's skepticism out there, certainly those on the right, that see what's going on, this historic precedence that was broken and the events that we saw at Mar-a-Lago, the unequal application of justice and what the FBI perhaps didn't do to Senator Clinton and what they're doing to President Trump. I think those are some of the concerns that we see out there.
The FBI revealed an investigation into Secretary Clinton 11 days before the 2016 election arguably helped Trump get elected president of the United States.
Well, I think you can argue about that point or not, but I think what those comments say is that there is skepticism out here. That's why we need transparency. That's why I've been calling, and I know others have been calling for, let's have the AG and let's have others start to obviously make the affidavit public, but let's talk about some transparency
going on to entrap Trump?
Well, we don't know. We don't know because they're not talking about it. What we do know is that this has never happened before. Never happened before.
If there's no evidence.
And so
you also have a former president taking all these documents down to Mar-a-Lago. What is he doing with that information? Why do you think that's a good idea for?
I don't think you know what type of documents he took. I certainly don't know what type of documents he took.
Do you think it's a good idea for the former president to have classified top-secret documents down at Mar-a-Lago, a club on the beach?
It's very difficult for me to answer. I don't know what documents he took. Yeah. So what we need is the AG to come out, right? I think they keep hiding behind the fact that this is an ongoing investigation, so we can't reveal anything. What they don't seem to understand, and what the American people are saying, is this is such a historic move that the FBI and the Department of Justice has taken. They need to take such an historic move to bring some transparency to this, to actually tell the American people, here's what we were concerned about. Here's what we were looking for. Either we found it or we didn't find it or whatever it may be. The more information that they can provide, the more, I think, closure that we can bring to some of this. I don't know that it's going to allay a lot of the concerns because, again, we talk about that unequal application of justice. And I think for a lot of folks, they see a lot of this targeted towards the right. And they want to know, why isn't this also, these types of procedures also being applied to the left? When you talk about IRS, the FBI, or whatever it might be. And that's the concern here. And I think that's what we heard from a number of those folks that you just played.